Hey guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we're going to get into the much long-awaited Falcons 2020 draft review. I am joined by Chad Forbes. You know him on Twitter at NFL DraftBites. Chad, man, welcome to the show.
Aaron, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. A good break from everything that's going on in our crazy world right now.
Yeah, needed a little bit of a refresher. Should have been doing this draft review a couple of weeks ago, immediately out on the heels of the draft. But I'm glad we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit about this Falcons draft class and get your thoughts on it. Starting things off, let's talk about the pick of A.J. Terrell in round one. I know a lot of people considered that pick to be a little bit of a reach. Were you in that camp?
I had a first-round grade on A.J. Terrell, and a big deal was made about the national championship game, and he was going up against some wide receivers that are, the kid next year is going to be a top 5 pick, and then obviously Justin Jefferson goes in the first round. So putting a small sample size and saying a guy's not worth a first-round pick, I think to me is just that's pretty foolish. So it was really, you could say it was a neat pick there. I like chasing a little bit more the pass rusher from LSU, but we were talking about it earlier when you start cycling out guys like Des Trufant, and you're bringing in Dante Fowler to be a pass rusher opposite McKinley. You've got to get the corner. They needed it. And so it's a bit of a need pick, but I thought it was pretty good value there.
Yeah. And, I saw that you had Terrell as your third-rated cornerback on your final rankings that you put out on Twitter a couple of days before the draft. Sort of where would you sort of say the gap or the drop-off between Terrell was and CJ Henderson, and how much of a drop off would you say there was between Terrell and your next ranked corner?
The fall off, I thought the top 3 corners there was only that belonged in the first round were Terrell, Henderson, and Okudah. And heading up to the draft, you heard a lot of people saying that Henderson might be bypassing Okudah, which I frankly found shocking. And you could see the upside with Henderson, but I don't think he's as complete of a player as Terrell. So from the perspective of getting year one production, I like the Terrell pick there. And, I think when you say what's the fall off, the reason they didn't move down the board, they had some offers. I think Philadelphia thought about coming up, getting ahead of Dallas for CeeDee Lamb was, the Raiders sitting there at 19. I don't think Terrell would have made it to 21. So at some point you got to say, all right, we got to get our player and, not try to be cute and get extra picks. And that's really what I thought they did is they said, we're going to be smart here. This is a huge need for us. And you put him opposite either Oliver or the kid they drafted out of Ohio State last year. And I think he got the semblance of a pretty good young cornerback group.
Now, you talk about moving back. A lot of talk, a lot of smoke was about the Falcons being one of the teams that are going to be very aggressive trading up in this draft. We didn't see really any trade ups really through the first, 13, 14 picks. And then the one trade up happened was the team moved up one spot in that sort of top 15, which was Tampa Bay and I think San Francisco. What did you make of all those rumors with the Falcons being a team to trade up? And why do you feel like a lot of teams didn't trade back? Do you feel like that was a technological hurdle that teams didn't necessarily want to get into doing the virtual draft, or was it just this particular draft class didn't necessarily have the type of value that prompted teams to want to sort of make the moves to move up in this draft?
The trading didn't start because the teams that are at 5 and 6 said we're going to wait on our quarterback. So there wasn't this idea that you had to move around, because if you're sitting like where the Falcons are, when the quarterbacks start coming off the board, you're saying, okay, we're going to get the 12th or 13th best guy on our board. There's no need to go up. So I think a lot of teams had that perspective. And, with the Falcons, you look at what the Eagles had in draft capital. Do you really want to trade pick 16 to get, like 21 and 103? Is that worth it to move down? I mean, the fall off between a guy like, the Terrell and the guy the Raiders took, Arnett, to me was just, huge if you want an outside corner. So I think a lot of it was, probably the technology that's going to be a factor. And I also think just not having the ability to kind of sit in your war room with a bunch of guys and collaborate and say, I talked to my pal with this team, these are the offers, he's floating around. And so you're not going to get a, kind of game out scenarios in terms of trading down, especially when, I think in this year's draft, just given that there wasn't as much kind of intel in terms of who was at pro days, who took 30 visits, there was less of a, he's going to take my guy, I need to go up. And so there were some surprise picks. I think around the league, people were wow, Arnett went in the first round. And there were some other guys where it was just like, wow, I didn't, maybe the media, they criticize us, the team saying we don't know what we're talking about. And this year, they're probably right.
Now we talked about the Falcons' first round pick. I want to sort of get into their day 2 selections, starting with Marlon Davidson, the defensive tackle. And I saw in your Twitter final rankings, you had Davidson as your third defensive tackle in this draft class, and your pre-combine rankings had him at 6. Sort of what happened in sort of that 2-month period that caused you to sort of move him up your board?
I had the second tier defensive tackles after Kinlaw and Derek Brown very closely ranked. I think I did still have Marlon Davidson as my third guy. I might have shuffled some positions around in terms of moving the defensive ends to interior. I know I did that with AJ Epinesa, looked at him more as like a sub-package defensive tackle. And I love Marlon Davidson. Dan Quinn forever since he's been there has been talking about, the brotherhood and competing to the football. And this kid really does that. I mean, he walked onto the campus at Auburn and became the first freshman defensive tackle to start there since 1985, which, that's really impressive considering some of the guys that have gone through that program where, it's like a Nick Fairley they've just had some loads of talent. So I love Marlon Davidson there. He's a little bit more of like a penetrating 3 technique than a true nose. But I don't think this system, they had the experiment with like Dontari Poe. And if you just look at how we're going to win this division, it's going to be getting to the quarterback. And you put him and Grady Jarrett next to each other, I think you got a pretty imposing interior duo if you line them both up kind of in that guard tackle gap.
Yeah, one of the things I talked about on this show after the Falcons signed Dante Fowler was given how Fowler's type of rushing is more that speed rush on the outside. And when he's been at his best, it's been because he's played with guys like Calais Campbell and Aaron Donald that were going to get that push up the middle, that when you combine it with his type of rushing, which is that speed rush, they complement each other. And while Grady Jarrett is one of the better interior pass rushers in the league, I think the Falcons certainly could have stand to improve there. And the expectations are that Davidson should be able to come in and help them out in that regard. What are your thoughts on sort of Davidson's ability to sort of quickly come in, impact this pass rush and be able to help the Falcons get pressure on some of these new quarterbacks that they're being facing in NFC South this year?
During the second half of the season, and if you look at just the Falcons pass rush for the last maybe like 2 decades back to John Abraham, it's been an issue, right? But if you look at the second half of the season, it got just seismically better when they went 7-1 down the stretch and finished with 4-game winning streak. And what I thought they started doing was really attacking protections, where they were giving their guys assigned gaps, not doing as much like stunting, but trying to put the linebackers closer or try to influence the fact that they were showing blitz to get one-on-one matchups for their defensive tackles and ends. So I think what you said is true about Fowler. You want him out kind of in like a wide 9 coming off the edge. He can still rip inside and counter, but I don't think he's, you're not going to play like a traditional ever 2-gap defense there that some of the teams like, the Giants have played over the years. So in this like 1-gap system where you can line up, 3rd and long, put 2 defensive tackles in the B gaps and really attack and put a linebacker over that center so he can't even help in the protections, I think you've really got something to look forward to. And it just fills out a good rotation with, Alan Bailey. He's a good player. He had a good season last year. And there's other guys there. I'm excited to see what John Kaminsky does and Tyler Davison. And so all of a sudden they start having kind of more depth there, which I think has just been a huge issue over the last few years.
Now, moving on to the opposite side of the ball, they picked up Matt Hennessy out of Temple in round 3. What are your thoughts on him and whether or not he's a guy that you feel like can come in and potentially compete immediately for that sort of nebulous left guard position where the Falcons had some issues there, or is he strictly more of a center in your eyes in the heir apparent to Alex Mack?
Where he went in round 3 and the system he came out of Temple, I think the NFL told you that we kind of view him as center only. But I do think he's got the versatility where you can dress him and say somebody goes down, you can put him in at guard. He started there as a freshman. But I really think this is about 2021. Alex Mack turns 35 in November, and they're starting to kind of try to rebuild that offensive line in more of a zones-based system, you'd say. And Chris Lindstrom really fits that at right guard. You bring in Hennessy, who needs to add a little bit of power, but he looks like the heir apparent to Alex Mack, a guy that maybe he competes at left guard. But I think if everything's ideal, you see James Carpenter either have a bounce back season or maybe Jamon Brown win there. And then I was also kind of interested in the guy they brought in from the Packers. I've been following him since his days at UCF. Justin McCray. So I think they've got some competition there at left guard, but I could see Hennessy sticking his nose in there and trying to win a spot. And then he just provides good depth at center.
Yeah. Where are your thoughts on sort of Hennessy's fit in terms of a scheme? And a lot of people say that Hennessy is primarily an outside zone type of blocker that would fit well in that same sort of mold that we've seen the Falcons have a lot of success on their ground game. So with the additions of guys like Hennessy, you add a player like Ty Gurley, who had a lot of success in that type of scheme in LA. Do you feel like this is the type of offense that's tailor-made to be more of that outside zone scheme that they kind of went away from last year under Dirk Cutter? You feel like this is a move that sort of signals that the Falcons may be getting back to that type of offense that they had under Kyle Shanahan and Steve Sarkisian?
It's interesting because last offseason they committed some pretty big money to James Carpenter and Jamon Brown, and those are two guys that early in Carpenter's career in Seattle, his issue was he just couldn't really fit himself into the zone system. And then Jamon Brown gets kind of shipped out of L.A. because he's more of a big mauler in the run game. But then they go get guys like Lindstrom and Hennessy, which points to him, and even Caleb McGarry points to more of a zone system emphasis. And you know what I think they're going to tell you from now is, we want to be multiple, which is what every team wants to do. And, with Gurley, you get a back that can really, do it all between the tackles and catch the ball. He's had success in the zone system, but I'm not necessarily sure he's not better in kind of a man system if you just ask him to kind of bang it up in there. So I think being multiple will be what they say, and then kind of see what works and how the pieces fit together as they roll into training camp.
Now, looking at the Falcons' day 3 selections, they only had 3, a pair of 4th-rounders in Fresno State linebacker Michael Walker, California safety Jalen Hawkins, and then pulling the trigger on Syracuse punter Sterling Hoffrichter in round 7. What are your thoughts on their day 3 picks, and does any one of those guys really stand out in your eyes as a guy that you feel like could wind up impacting for this Falcon team?
Michael Walker was a guy that I really liked. He was a JUCO transfer to Fresno State, really productive, and Dan Quinn's had a lot of success with linebackers over the years. If you go back to, his days in Seattle with Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, and he's kind of a bigger guy that can flow to the football and come in and compete with the Yale linebacker. And as you said, they just brought in Deion Buchanan, so he definitely adds some depth there. And he seems like a guy that'll probably pick up the system pretty quickly. And I say the same thing on Jalen Hawkins. He's kind of a versatile guy with some size. I think that he's more of a kind of in the similar sense to Hennessy, a pick for 2021 when Kazay hits free agency. Don't know if Ricardo Allen will be back. And what you keep hearing with defensive backs is teams want guys that are interchangeable, because if you're a backup and you're going to dress on game day, you got to be able to back up both positions, play in the sub package. So I think he can do that. And then the punter, he's a punter. Ryan Allen, really, his career's kind of fallen off, and they released him, then brought him back. So that'll be one of those interesting training camp battles to watch. And when you take a punter like that in round 6, 7, you only have 6 draft picks, that really gives you the opportunity to attack undrafted free agency.
Were there any of their undrafted free agents that stood out? I know Vanderbilt tight end Jared Pinkney was one of the higher rated tight ends in this draft class, but a lot of people sort of see this draft class, or at least at that tight end position, as a weak crop. Were there any other players in addition to Pinkney that sort of stood out to you?
Yes, Salalosi Lata, the defensive tackle from San Jose State, was kind of a really interesting sign, and he could be a guy that fits that kind of traditional nose tackle role. And I thought that was a good one to get. They got 15, 16 guys. Evan Krasinski from Buffalo, he's got a chance to, I guess, be kind of the heir apparent to John Wetzel as a swing tackle type. And then I really like the wide receiver from Albany, Jawan Green. I think if it wasn't such a deep wide receiver class, he would get drafted. So I think he's got a real chance to make the roster. And same with Chris Rowland and McCleskey from Tulane. So then with Pinkney, they got some really interesting undrafted free agents. And what you like about what Dan Quinn does in Atlanta is it really is a competition. If you prove that you deserve a spot on the roster, the way these contracts are set up, they can get out from a lot of the veteran deals and bring these guys under the fold, and then also provide depth onto the practice squad. So I like what they did in undrafted free agents. I also like the Ferris State defensive end. So it's fun when you see 15 kids that are coming in with a lot to prove, and they'll get that opportunity when camp starts.
So looking at this crop of incoming rookies, as well as the free agent signings that the Falcons were able to make earlier this offseason with players like Gurley and Dante Fowler and Hayden Hurst, do you feel like this offseason really moved the needle forward for the Falcons, and this is a team that can get back into playoff contention in 2020?
Resources were just so tight that they're letting Hooper leave and bringing in Hurst saved them some money and probably upgraded their ability to block the edge and add an extra gap in the run game. And I liked, under the radar guys they signed out of the XFL, whether it's the corner Hawkins or Edmund Robinson or Kerry Lee was, the best tight end in the XFL. I thought, if you're looking for some value, signing those guys to reserve future minimums contracts, was really smart. And then Dante Fowler should really upgrade the pass rush. I'm not a Vic Beasley guy. I really didn't understand why they brought him back last year on that 5th-year option. And, he should really become kind of the alpha on the edge. He's still just 26 years old. I think he's getting better. And with Dan Quinn obviously having experience with him back to Florida, that he can trust him and he'll fit into, what I said Dan Quinn calls, the brotherhood. I think he'll get the best out of him. So I like them going after Fowler and not going after a guy like Jadeveon Clowney. I just think he fits better in the system. And I thought they did a good job in free agency. You're not going to – I guess some of these smaller deals where it's like a guy like Justin McCray, you guarantee him $350,000. I think he's an NFL offensive lineman. And last year you had some issues there with depth, so I liked that. And then I also thought it was good to bring back some of their depth pieces. Davison had a pretty good season for them. And you like to bring in a guy like Davison. They brought in for really no money last offseason. He plays well, you reward him. It really incentivizes other free agents to say, I want to go to Atlanta. If I play well, they'll reward me. So I like that. And then, death taxes and bleed Ray Wilson is back. I don't know if Dan Quinn can function without him. So they've got some depth there. And that's really what they need, because last year when the injuries hit, they just had so many issues kind of functioning as a defense. And then somehow miraculously, all of a sudden, defensive coordinator shifting down the stretch. I mean, they went into San Francisco and gave them all they could handle. Really, them, New Orleans, they were just a completely different defense. So you hope the upgrade in talent can help that defense even take the next step.
And looking at the situation with the Falcons coaching staff, coming off of a sort of up and down 2019 season where they started 1-7 and then finished 6-2 to finish 7-9, do you feel like it's fair for Dan Quinn and or general manager Thomas Dimitroff to be on the hot seat, or do you feel like they just need a little bit more time to right the ship?
Dimitroff's been there now for, I guess this is his 12th or 13th season. So he's hired 2 coaches. Will he get to hire a third? That's an interesting question if this doesn't work out. And, the players endorsed him with the way they played down the stretch. They didn't quit. They could have easily walked into San Francisco and kind of, laid down and said, run it down our throats, and they didn't. They kept flying to the football. And I think really when it comes down to it, the most important thing in the NFL is just an owner that's, not going to overly meddle, and also is a smart guy that, has some experience in business. And I think what Arthur Blank did, bringing those guys back and not necessarily giving them an ultimatum, but, they're all smart and big boys, and they know if it doesn't work out this year, he's going to be looking for a new coach and potentially general manager.
Okay. Well, Chad, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your thoughts on the Falcons offseason as well as their draft. Let everybody know where they can find you on Twitter and what you got planned for as we all sit in our houses this summer waiting for an NFL season.
Well, I'm going to be coming out on my NFL 200, so I like to go out to 200 players and soon, and you'll be able to find that at NFL DraftBites on Twitter. And hopefully as camp rolls around, maybe we'll get into extension season and there'll be some more news in the NFL. But until then, just give me a follow. And Aaron, thanks for having me. I love your work.
Absolutely, Chad. Look forward to talking with you later this year to sort of see what happens with the Falcons, and hopefully we will get a season to talk about.
I've got one question for you before I go, though. Over under 7.5 wins this year.
I think I'll go over. I think they get to at least 8.
Yeah, this is the time of the year for optimism. Thanks for having me, Aaron.
All right, man. Have a good night, Chad. All right, guys, there was Chad Forbes of NFL DraftBites. Follow him on Twitter at NFL DraftBites. Get his thoughts on the Falcons draft class. And I know it's been a couple of weeks since, and some of you might not have gotten my thoughts on the draft class when we did our sort of live 3.5-hour Saturday extravaganza on draft weekend. Generally speaking, a plus draft for the Falcons, getting AJ Terrell in round 1, not a reach. Marlon Davidson will help the pass rush, as Chad said. Matt Hennessy, solid pick for the future at the center position. Day 3 picks, you're going special teams. You're getting some depth at linebacker and safety. You need that. In Michael Walker and Jalen Hawkins, you're getting a punter. You can argue if you needed a punter, but, you're getting a solid player that could wind up, having a career similar to Matt Bosher and wind up being the Falcons punter for the next, 7 to 10 years. So all in all, a solid draft for the class, solid class for the Falcons draft. And I think it's one that may not be the sexiest draft class, particularly when you say that they only had 6 picks and only a handful of these guys probably are going to come in and carve out immediate roles. I think you're expecting Terrell and Davidson to sort of come in and be significant contributors right away. Everybody else, I think, is kind of a wait and see in terms of what they can contribute in 2020. And hopefully you're hoping that they can make major contributions down the road, more so than necessarily coming in right away. And, I think overall it's a solid class. We're talking about Michael Walker and the fact that the Falcons needed some depth at that linebacker position. They were able to address that somewhat today on Thursday, signing a former first-round pick, another former first-round pick, and Deion Buchanan, out of formerly of the Arizona Cardinals, played last year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at least began 2019 with the Bucs, then finished 2019 with the Giants when the Bucs cut him midway through the season so that they could wind up getting a comp pick in this past year's draft. I think they wound up trading that pick, if I'm not mistaken, to New England to get Rob Gronkowski. So, Buchanan's another one of these former first-round picks, one of these name players that the Falcons seem to have been collecting this offseason, getting Fowler, getting Gurley, getting Hayden Hurst, getting Laquan Treadwell, getting Charles Harris. Seemingly, they're getting all these first-round picks. I think Fowler, Gurley, and Hurst are expected to make major contributions to the Falcons this year. So calling any of those guys reclamation projects, I think, is a little bit of a stretch. But certainly in the Treadwell and Harris camp, two guys that did not live up to expectations in their original landing spots in Minnesota for Treadwell and Miami for Charles Harris, certainly, I don't necessarily love using the B word, but certainly you can call them first-round busts. And, I don't think that's a fair statement to say about Buchanan, who played a lot, started a lot, was productive in Arizona, but didn't quite live up to the expectations, I think, led to some of his early success as time progressed. Some of his limitations being kind of a undersized linebacker and maybe not being the most physical in terms of like taking on blocks. He's certainly a hitter. And that's what he made his reputation in college as a safety. But some of those issues and not necessarily being a lockdown cover guy sort of eventually caught up to him in Arizona. He didn't have as much success. But I think in terms of reclamation projects, if you're going to call him that, compared to guys like Harris, compared to Treadwell, like we know while Buchanan didn't necessarily live up to expectations, I think he's a solid pickup for the Falcons because I feel like he's at least adding something to the team that I think is debatable whether Treadwell and Harris are going to really do much for the team this year. Won't say that they, I think Treadwell's on the bubble in terms of entering camp, and I don't think Harris is on the bubble. I don't think his contract allows him to be on the bubble, but it's one of those things that if he didn't have a guaranteed contract, I don't know if he would be a lock to make the roster either. But I think Buchanan definitely has that ability in the sense that, he started like 50 plus games in the NFL. He can play, linebacker in the scheme, and he can play special teams. And that's something that Treadwell doesn't do. That's not something that Harris is going to do. So if those guys don't carve out significant roles on offense or defense, then, they're going to have a tougher time making the roster. But Buchanan's not going to have that issue. Not to mention, you really solidify and upgrade that depth. The Falcons are extremely thin at the linebacker position. You have Deion Jones, you have Foye Oluokun as your two starters. Beyond that, you don't really have much experience. Your most experienced player is Leroy Reynolds, who's basically been a special teams guy. And when he's gotten opportunities on defense, not only here in Atlanta, but in Philadelphia and Jacksonville, going back in his career, Chicago, has not been particularly productive. You got a rookie in Michael Walker who has some talent, who has some upside, but I don't think you want him starting an extended amount of reps. You want to sort of bring him along slowly. And then you bring in a guy like Edmund Robinson for the XFL, who did some positive work in that shortened season in the XFL, but by and large has been sort of a back end of the roster guy going back to his days in Minnesota. So if you're not necessarily confident that he can come in, should a guy like Oluokun, should a guy like Jones go down for a couple of games and you get plus value. And we've seen the last couple of years where linebacker depth has been an Achilles heel a little bit for the Falcons, going back to Deion Jones's injury 2 years ago. So getting a guy like Buchanan where you don't have to necessarily worry, like you have three solid options at linebacker now. And if Buchanan's coming off the bench, I don't think you're worried about much of his issues because, again, he's a backup. If he's a starter, then I think we can start to have a conversation about whether or not he's going to be a big difference maker for your football team. But again, I don't think the Falcons are signing him to be a starter. They're signing him to be a backup. And then, a lot of people will say like, oh, well, he can play safety too because he's a safety. Well, not really. He's always been kind of a linebacker, if you ask me. Like, could he play safety? Sure. Given that the Falcons, arguably, again, because of the youth of Jalen Hawkins, because, Jamal Carter, who sort of stepped in midway through the season last year after Kamal Ishmael fell flat on his face replacing Con O'Neal, Carter was okay, but isn't a guy that's going to wow you. And for various reasons, the one guy that has proven that he can be a effective backup strong safety for you in Sherrod Neesman, as we often mention on this podcast, doesn't get the opportunity to sort of play. There's some questions there at strong safety. So I think Buchanan is an option there for the Falcons if Keanu Neal were to go down again. But I feel like in a similar vein, not quite to the degree that Kamal Ishmael was, but if you're forced to have to start Deion Buchanan at strong safety for multiple games, it's going to be an issue. So I think ultimately the Falcons in that scenario, if they lose Keanu Neal, in that scenario, you're going to see what they did last year at the safety position where they'll move Ricardo Allen to strong safety. They'll move DeMonte Casey to starting free safety, and they'll play a lot more two high looks with that cover two and play those split safety looks as opposed to the conventional cover three with the single high safety and that box strong safety, given that neither Allen nor Casey are really ideally suited for that role. Allen showed that he can function in that role in the second half of the season and be all right. And so if push came to shove, the Falcons can get by with Allen there, but you wouldn't necessarily say that conventionally that's a great fit for his skill set. So I think the Falcons, at least with Buchanan, have an option that they can explore, they can play with in training camp, hopefully in training camp when we get there later this summer. And, they can maybe dabble with that, but primarily I think Buchanan is going to be more of a linebacker for the team. And so I think he's a solid depth signing. It was interesting a couple of weeks ago that the Falcons seemed to be vocal about like they were going to saving that last roster spot on their 90-man roster for a kicker to challenge Younghoe Koo. And I wonder if they are, who knows when training camp's happening, but if when we get to training camp, are they going to bring in a kicker to push Koo, or are they going to basically roll the dice again like they did last summer with Giorgio Tavecchio? We saw that didn't necessarily work out in their favor. So I wonder if the Falcons are planning on making a move, but as Dan Quinn said a week or so ago when first asked about it, he said that they can't really work out guys given all the things going on and how the team facilities are shut down. So they can't really work out guys like they normally would. And so therefore, until they can work out guys, they probably won't sign a kicker. So again, hopefully, whenever they get the go ahead to open up training camps, by that point in time, you assume that they'll be able to work out guys and bring in guys to compete for a job. And so then potentially it would sign a kicker. So I'll be curious to sort of see if the Falcons do that, but that seems like a move that's maybe, at this point in time, it's hard to speculate how long the timetable is going to be for that, but seems like it's at least a month or two. Well, obviously, even if training camp starts on time, it's still a month or two away. So at the very minimum, it's a month or two. So we'll see how that goes. If you guys have questions in the chat, I will by all means answer them. Don't have a whole lot else to say on today's episode, just sort of giving a broad general overview of this draft class with Chad Forbes, as well as their sort of offseason moves that they made in the last couple of weeks. The Buchanan signing, again, talked about earlier. And, I know we've been sort of a little bit on a hiatus these last couple of weeks, and so we haven't been able to jump into the film breakdowns that we have done pretty consistently on weekends throughout the offseason, talking about the free agent signings. If you haven't seen those, you can, of course, check those out on the Pro Football Central YouTube channel. We did Dante Fowler, we did Todd Gurley, we did Hayden Hurst, we did Laquan Treadwell. The plan is to do these rookies, and I'm not sure I'll do it this weekend because it's a holiday, but certainly we should be able to start those up. And certainly that will be some weekend content for you guys as we get to this slower point in the summer season, as we sort of wait on, when hopefully things will be able to go back to normal. But the plan is to continue to do sort of also weekly shows and whatnot. But we know we're hitting that slow point in the summer as well. So as Chad said, maybe not a whole lot's going to be going on as we sort of sit here in wait and see mode. So I see a couple of questions in the chat. Dew Talk Sports says, how many games do you think the Falcons will win this season? I think I said, I got them at 8-8 right now. I feel like 9-7 is possible. Ask me again when we get to training camp. Maybe some stuff has happened enough for me to feel a little bit more positive. But usually, like right now, I kind of feel like they're an 8-8 team. And hopefully going into training camp or coming out of training camp, coming out of the preseason, certain developments, maybe certain guys that I'm not necessarily expecting to be high impact guys come in and hit the ground running and have good camps. And I'm a little bit more optimistic. Maybe we deal with some other developments around the league, sort of make me feel like the Falcons schedule isn't going to be as tough as it is. I think that's really the thing that's holding me back from being super, super optimistic about the Falcons' chances this year. It's just the strength of the schedule. It's a tough schedule. And it's one of those things where, they're facing a lot of good quarterbacks. They're facing a lot of good receivers. And the reason why that matters is because they have question marks in terms of their pass rush, and they have question marks in terms of their cornerbacks. And so if they can't slow down the Dak Prescotts and the Russell Wilsons and the Tom Bradys and the Drew Brees and the Aaron Rodgers and the Matt Staffords, et cetera, Patrick Mahomes, that they're going to be facing this upcoming season, then it's going to be really tough for the Falcons to have a lot of success. Like, they'll have some success, don't get me wrong, but the type of success where I can sit here and say, oh, they're a 10 or 11 win team if they can't stop those guys. And then you couple that with some of the concerns with the offense that we talked about on the show in previous weeks, where you have concerns about what is the identity of this offense. I mean, that's really the issue. It's not that they lack the talent to be able to produce an offense. It's the questions are about their identity and whether Dirk Cutter and Dan Quinn can be on the same page when it comes to what type of offense they want to run. Is it an outside zone scheme? Is it a play action based scheme? Is it the Cutter offense? Is it the imitation of the Shanahan offense? What exactly is their offense? And without having that firmly, without being able to sit here and say, this is exactly what the Falcons are going to try to do this upcoming season, it's hard for me to be overly optimistic that Dirk Cutter's going to do a great job. I think he'll do a better job than he did last year. Personally, I don't think he can. I don't want to say that because it feels like a jinx, but like I was going to say, I don't think he can do a lot worse than he did last year, given the amount of talent that the Falcons have. But whether or not they're going to be great. Who are some of the guys you expect to make a jump from 2019? Let me see. Russell Gage is a guy that I'm expecting to make a jump. I'm not expecting him to make a night and day jump. Like suddenly he's going to be the best number 3 wide receiver in the league, but I expect him to be a little bit more reliable of that chain mover because he was I think he converted like 1/3 down all last season. So I'm hoping that number, is up to like 6 or 7, possibly 10, ideally. Calvin Ridley's another guy that I think has to make a jump. And that I think that gets back to Dirk Cutter and how he utilizes him. Tack McKinley is another guy that I'm hoping can make a jump. Let me see who else. I think Deion Jones is a guy that needs to make a jump as well. I know Deion Jones is very good, but the knock on Deion Jones, I think, is, he has like 6 good games and then the rest of the season, not to say he's bad the rest of the season, but he's just pretty good. Like, I think he kind of needs to have like 12, of those sort of 6 great games that he has in order to really sort of hide some of the issues that the Falcons have elsewhere on the defense. Kojak Nantucket, how do you think our secondary will pan out? Who is returning the ball with the exit of the running back we had from Carolina? The return specialist is an interesting battle because I think Olamide Zaccheaus is the guy that I would hopefully pick to return, because I think, one of the things I complained about on this podcast last summer during training camp was having a roster spot solely devoted to someone who just returns kicks and doesn't do anything on offense or defense. And I think Zaccheaus, of the guys that are competing for that job, and we heard special teams coordinator Ben Cottaquet last week say it's Zaccheaus, it's the undrafted rookie Chris Rowland out of Tennessee State, it's the other wide receiver Brandon Powell was on the practice squad for most of last year. And of those 3 guys, I think Zaccheaus clearly has the more upside on offense. And so therefore he's the guy that I would love to see return the job, but he muffed 2 punts last summer, and you can't do that. You can't, muff punts and win the job. Like Devin Hester can muff punts because he's Devin Hester, but like Olamide Zaccheaus can't do that. So hopefully he can improve there. So he would be the guy I want to win the job. But if I was sitting here today and saying, who's in the best position to do so, I think Chris Rowland's got a puncher's chance to wind up winning those duties, because that's what he did in college and was pretty productive at doing so. In terms of the secondary, I think, I'm not super high on the secondary. I think they have some young talent. I'm not expecting that young talent to sort of hit the ground running. I like AJ Terrell, I like his upside, but he's going to be kind of thrown to the wolves this year, and early in the season, he's going to face some of the premier wide receivers in the league. The Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf in Seattle, Amari Cooper in Dallas, CeeDee Lamb. Week 3, they have Chicago, Allen Robinson. Week 4, they have Devontae Adams. Carolina made an upgrade with Robbie Anderson, adding to DJ Moore. I can't remember the rest of the schedule. Detroit, they have Kenny Golladay. So these corners are going to get tested right off the bat, and it's not going to let up all season long. So if they don't come out of the gates hitting the ground running, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for them this season. And I think that's why I'm putting a lot more pressure, more emphasis on the Falcons pass rush to kind of have to come out of the gates and really help these young corners out. Because I think in the second half of the season, one of the reasons why the Falcons defense was able to turn things around, as Chad mentioned, is because they were able to get much more effective pressure on the quarterback. That led to some turnovers, particularly in games against like Kyle Allen and Jameis Winston. They're facing quarterbacks this upcoming season that don't turn the ball over. Russell Wilson doesn't throw picks. Aaron Rodgers doesn't throw picks. Tom Brady doesn't throw picks. Drew Brees, outside of a couple of games, doesn't throw picks against the Falcons. Those 5 interception games don't happen very often with Drew Brees. So it's one of those things where they're going to face some good quarterbacks that don't turn the ball over. And the only way that they're going to force them to turn the ball over is by being aggressive up front and being able to get pressure on the quarterback. So for me, it's one of those things. That's why I think like the secondary, like I don't have a lot of expectations on these guys. I think it's really going to come down to that front four with Marlon Davidson, with Takk McKinley, with Grady Jarrett, with Dante Fowler. All those guys got to come out and ball this year. Because if those guys aren't able to reliably get pressure with their front four, I'm not super confident that this secondary is going to be able to play at the level that they need to play, like that we've seen past years with guys like Desmond Trufant and Robert Alford, particularly in 2016 and 2017, when the Falcons didn't have a superstar pass rush. I mean, 2017, it was pretty decent with Poe and Claiborne and Grady and Takk and all those guys. But, we're not getting that type of cornerback play, in my opinion, this upcoming season from these young guys. So even though that pass rush in 2017 was pretty good, this pass rush this year, I think it's going to have to be even better than that. This is going to have to be the best pass rush, frankly, that we've ever seen with the Falcons. Like going back probably to the 1998 season with Chuck Smith and Lester Archambault and Travis Hall. And even that pass rush, like, no offense to those guys, like, it was good, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like amazing. It's just when you look at sort of the 20 plus years in hindsight, in retrospect, like it compares very favorably. But so how would you rank the Falcons defense overall? I mean, like, if you're asking me, like, what do I think the Falcons defense is going to rank in the league? I kind of put them in that 14 to 20 range. Like, that's where I kind of think they're going to be, which I think is good enough to win, particularly if your offense is in that 5 to 10 range. If your offense is in that 5 to 10 range, this is a team that I think has a chance to win 9 or 10 games this year, assuming that they, can win some close games against some of these quality opponents that they're going to face this upcoming season. If you're talking about like each position group, I mean, like, I think they're secondary. I like their safeties, but we don't know what Keanu Neal's going to be, and Ricardo Allen's getting up there in age. So their safeties are fine, but I don't look at their like a couple of years ago, I would have said, oh, they have some of the best safeties in the league. I don't know if I would go that far. The cornerback group is very unproven. I mean, you can make an argument that, given how much of an unknown and question mark some of these young guys are, they have one of the bottom 5 cornerback rooms in the league. Linebacker, Deion Jones is probably the only thing keeping it from being good. Like, if you just take Deion Jones away and you put him an average start, like let's say you remove Deion Jones from the equation and you have Deion, Buchanan, Foye Olakun, and Michael Walker as your top 3. Like, I think you're putting that group in the bottom part of the league as well. Their pass rush, I think their front 4 has a chance to be above average, I would say. So, like, for me, when I look at each position group, I don't necessarily see this loaded, talented defensive group. Like, to me, it's going to have to outperform the sum of its parts, because I think the sum of its parts, while I'm not trying to sit here and say it's bad or anything like that. It's just, it doesn't get me excited. I'm just like, oh, like they got some pieces there, and I'm gonna enjoy to see what AJ Terrell's going to be in a couple of years, but I don't necessarily know if he's going to come in out of the gates and be, the second coming of Denzel Ward or anything like that. You think Chris Rowland can have a Miko Hardman kind of role on the Falcons? Sure, if Andy Reid was calling plays, if Sean Payton was calling plays, sure. I think he had that type of potential, but not with their cutter. Simple as that. How do you think the match of Ryan and Hayden will work out? Better or worse than Hooper? I hear Ryan and Hayden have already started working out and getting chemistry. Your thoughts? It took Hooper the better part of like 3 years to get on the same page with Matt Ryan, and he had full off seasons to go. Well, his rookie year, he didn't have a full off season because, he came late because of the Pac-12 and the quarter system. So like, I don't think that's something that you can develop overnight. I don't think there's any real evidence to say that you got people develop that overnight. Even Julio Jones and Matt Ryan didn't develop that overnight. It took them the better part of a year for them to get on the same page. So I like the fact that Hayden Hurst and Matt Ryan are working out together. They need to, obviously, they can't just be sitting at home during this time period. But in terms of that sort of moving the needle for me to think that they're going to suddenly hit the ground running come week one, and Hayden Hurst is going to have 7 catches for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Seahawks. I'm not expecting that to happen, but I don't know how the Seahawks defense is against tight ends. Maybe they're really vulnerable against those guys. I have to go back and see it, how George Kittle did it. But like, my hope is with Hayden Hurst and Matt Ryan, like, my hope is like by the time we get to Thanksgiving, they should be on the same page. Like, because I remember when Matt Ryan and Tony Gonzalez came into the league, like it took them the better part of that season to get on the same page, and that was Tony Gonzalez. And you could say, oh, okay, well, that was Matt Ryan in his second year in the NFL. He didn't know any better. But like, if it takes like 12 plus weeks for Matt Ryan and Tony Gonzalez getting on the same page, I would say that that's the minimum timetable for Matt Ryan and Hayden Hurst. So I feel better about Matt Ryan getting on the same page with Hayden Hurst than I would if the Falcons drafted a rookie. I feel like because Hayden Hurst has been around the block, that's better than the alternative. But like, I don't think anybody should be expecting Hayden Hurst to come into this season and put up a season like Austin Hooper did the last 2 years and be a Pro Bowler. I think that's maybe a potentially realistic expectation in 2021. But coming into this, like, my expectation for Hayden Hurst this upcoming season is going to be similar to Austin Hooper's 2017 season. Now, I know Austin Hooper had a down 2017 because of the drop passes. So I'm not expecting Hayden Hurst to have a bunch of drops or anything like that this year. I think his hands will not allow that to happen. But in terms of him coming in and sort of his production level, like, that's what I'm thinking he's going to have. Like, he'll have some good games, he'll have some quiet games, and it'll be up and down, and it won't necessarily be as consistent as we would want it to be. So I think Hayden Hurst will be fine, but I think you got to temper some expectations somewhat. Yeah, well, do you think Hurst will be similar to Hooper's 2018? No, I think it's going to be more like his 2017. I mean, like, Hooper's 2018 was like, well, he had like 70 catches, 800 plus yards, whatever. I mean, Hooper, until he got hurt, he was on pace last year to have like 100 catches, 1,000 yards last year, almost 1,100 yards, and like 10, 11 touchdowns. Like, so, like, that's one of the things that gets lost in the Austin Hooper, and he's like overrated and he's overpaid and he's not this. Like, he was going to lead the league in, at least at the tight end position. He was on pace before he got hurt to be that level of production. Now, you can get into the argument of whether he was benefiting a lot from the fact that the Falcons were playing from behind and he was, quote unquote, padding his stats. That's fair, but yeah, I think my expectation for Hurst is he's going to come in and get maybe like 60 some odd catches, 750 yards and a couple of touchdowns. And that's my expectations for him. Give me your honest feeling. How do you think our running back core committee will pan out this year? Mainly TG3. I think Gurley's going to be fine. I'm not expecting Gurley to have this monster season, if I'm being honest. Like my expectation for Gurley is going to be like 900 some odd yards, maybe 1,000. Maybe he hits like 1,034 or something like that if he has a couple of big long runs. And then maybe like 300, 400 yards receiving. Like I think the expectation that he's going to have like 1,000 to 1,200 yards rushing and like 500 to 800 yards receiving, I don't necessarily see that. It's not to say that he's not capable of that, but looking at Dirk Cutter's history in terms of how he utilizes the running backs in the passing game, he's not particularly creative with how he uses running backs. Not in Tampa Bay, not last year in Atlanta. So, maybe I would feel a little more optimistic about that if we had a different coordinator. And then you couple that with like the thing about Gurley is like, I don't think, and we talked about this on the film breakdown now, I guess 2 months ago, that again, you can find here on Pro Football Central. Like, I don't think he's as explosive as he was in his heyday. And a lot of Gurley's high production, in my opinion, in past years was because he would, every game he would seemingly be a threat to break those 30, 40, 50 plus yard runs. And I don't know if that guy is coming back. Like he might get a couple of those, but like the guy that could regularly get those week in and week out, I just don't know if that dude's coming back. And that's really the difference between, oftentimes that can be the difference between having 900 and 1,100 rushing yards or something like that. So we'll see. What positions do you think the Falcons need to improve on offense and defense side of the ball when we get to the post June 1st money? Well, I mean, look, I'm still probably foolishly holding out hope that the Falcons address the pass rush. Going back to what I said earlier, I feel like their pass rush is going to make or break this defense. And to me, I'm like, let's get 5, 6 good pass rushers, which is what we had in 2017 when we had Poe, we had Claiborne, we had Jarrett, we had Tack, we had Beasley, and we had Brooks Reed, who was actually better than Beasley that season as far as a pass rusher. That spin move was wonderful. And you don't necessarily need superstars. You just need guys that can come in that you can trust and be able to create pressure and disrupt these throws and disrupt these quarterbacks that we're going to face. And right now, I feel good about Tack. I feel good about Davidson. I feel good about Jarrett. I feel good about Fowler. Beyond that, I don't really feel good about anybody else. Like Bailey has the potential, but I mean, he's coming off a pretty lackluster year where he was basically a non-factor in terms of the pass rush outside of maybe 2 games. So is that going to flip? Possible. It's not impossible that could happen, but like I'm not sitting here going to hold my breath. I think John Kaminsky has potential, but I'm not expecting him to be that type of dude to come in and be sort of that Brooks Reed type of guy that can come in and get you 20, 30 pressures off the bench and be a reliable pass rusher in that way. So for me, I'm like, I feel like he still can go out there and get a Cam Wake and get an Everson Griffin. But given the fact that the Falcons went out and got Charles Harris, I think they kind of already made their bed, and that's what they're going to lie in. And they're going to trust in Charles Harris to be that 5th guy. And I don't have a lot of confidence in that. So Cam Newton say he's open to backup quarterback position. Would he be a good fit? And he's from Atlanta. I mean, no. I like Cam Newton. I'm not gonna use this to hate on Cam Newton. There is a alternate reality where Cam Newton comes to Atlanta for very cheap, for backup quarterback money, like Jameis Winston did to New Orleans, where the Falcons could legitimately afford him, and they have an offensive coordinator that knows how to utilize Cam Newton, which you can question whether or not any offensive coordinators outside of Norv Turner has really been able to maximize Cam Newton's ability. And I don't think Dirk Cutter's a Norv Turner. And clearly the Falcons don't have the cap space to really go out there and pay Cam Newton what I'm sure. Like he may be open to being a backup quarterback, but he's not going to do it for $1 million. I would be surprised if that were to happen. Like Jameis didn't have any other options. And you're not going to, it's like, I'm that weirdo that thinks Matt Schaub is fine as the backup quarterback. I don't feel like that's a concern. Matt Schaub can get you through this season. Now, next season, I mean, depending on what the Falcons' situation is, maybe we can explore the possibility of Cam Newton being the backup. But by then, one would assume that there will be a starting job available for Cam. So, yeah, I don't get the Cam Newton hype. Again, I know that's a lot of that's related to, I know some of that's related to people not loving Matt Ryan. I know a lot of that's related to people hating on Matt Schaub. I don't know what Matt Schaub has to do to win you guys over. My guy balled in that Seattle game. Like, I know we lost the game. I know it was kind of stat padding in the second half, but like once Dirk Cutter realized, oh, like Matt Schaub is a play action passing quarterback and let's run some play action passing, he started throwing dimes to Julio Jones in that game. And I'm like, if the Falcons had done that opening drive, the first 3 drives of the game, I think they could have beaten Seattle with Matt Schaub as the backup quarterback. And so, like, I don't think the issue is Matt Schaub. I think the issue is the play calling more so than the backup quarterback situation. So that's kind of where I fall on the whole Cam Newton conversation. Like, nothing against Cam. I think Cam deserves an opportunity to start in this league. He's 1,000% one of the best 32 quarterbacks in this league. He's 1,000% one of the top 20 quarterbacks in this league, arguably one of the top 15 quarterbacks in the league. So he should be starting somewhere. So, bringing him into Atlanta, will get headlines, but I don't think it's really going to move the needle for your football team all that much because hopefully Matt Ryan's not going to miss any time and Matt Schaub can get you through a game if you know what you're doing as a play caller, which that's the real issue for the Falcons. Do you think a lot of the offseason had to do with Rich McKay, and do you think he will be a big influence during the season? No, I don't think Rich McKay has that much influence. I think he's a sounding board. I think he goes to the meetings now. I think he can raise his hand in those meetings, now in the Zoom calls. He can unmute the mic, or so to speak, and talk when he wants to talk because he's part of the decision-making process. But in terms of like him, saying like we should go get this guy or we should draft this guy or whatever the case may be, no. I think basically the last, 8 years or whatever, however long it's been, Rich McKay's basically been, the business guy and has mostly been not involved too much in the football conversations. I think the only thing that changed this offseason is that he's now in those football meetings. But in terms of like pulling his weight in those meetings and influencing decisions, no, I don't necessarily, unless I can hear something differently or someone comes out and says like, oh, this was a move that the Falcons made because Rich McKay's influence. I'm not really buying the whole idea that Rich McKay really did anything this offseason to really change how the Falcons approach things. So I just think he's a guy in the meeting, not necessarily a guy that's running the meeting. CD3224 asks, do you think Danny Etling can be a kind of Swiss Army knife similar to Taysom Hill who can be utilized in the Wildcat form? Well, CD, man, you must know me perfectly because you're asking all these questions that I want to go off on. Yes, I think Danny Etling can be kind of a Taysom Hill. Is he as good as Taysom Hill? No. But in terms of missing that 12 gauge from Sanu, the player that to me that is best poised to take over that regard, we saw a little bit of Gage do that. So I think if the Falcons do decide to do that, they will probably do Russell Gage to play that role of being that wildcat guy. But I think Danny Etling is uniquely positioned that, unlike Gage, is legitimately a threat to throw the ball in those situations. And I think a smart play caller would try to find a way to, in the roster, there's rule changes with the roster. You can have expand active rosters. You can have 2 practice squad guys on your active roster. It changes each and every week. But I think there's an opportunity there this year more so than previous years where if you can find a way to stash Danny Etling on your roster and find a package for him in those short yardage situations where he can be a runner and a dual threat passer, I think you can do some things. And I think why the 12 gauge was so effective, not only because of Sanu's unique skill set, is it's about numbers in the box. And basically when the quarterback is a threat to run the football, it's the player that the defense can't account for. And it makes it extremely hard to defend that type of offense. And that's why pretty much every time Sanu lines up in the 12 gauge, like his third down conversion rate on rushing the football out of the 12 gauge was like 80-something%. And like even when he handed the ball off to Devontae Freeman, his third down rushing percentage and conversion rate was like 80-something%. It's just that hard to defend. And if you have a quarterback that is a legit running threat, and so maybe this is the reason why maybe some people are, high on the idea of Cam Newton. That's why Cam Newton constantly was able to convert on third and shorts and whatnot. So I don't think you necessarily need to go out and pay Cam Newton to get that type of value. You can get that relatively cheap in Danny Etling. So yes, I am in favor of Danny Etling having a role as a Wildcat quarterback in this offense. And that's why you will continue to hear me hype up Danny Etling for no apparent reason other than I think there's something there. Not to say it's on the same level as Cam Newton or Lamar Jackson or Taysom Hill, but I think there's something that is worthy of the Falcons to try to salvage. Do you think this will be Dan Quinn's last year with Atlanta, and who do you think will be our next head coach? How do I answer this question? Yeah, I kind of think this will be his last year. If they go 8-8 like I think they're going to go, yeah, I don't see him coming back. But right now, who knows? Time will tell, and he'll have the opportunity to prove me wrong there. If I was sitting here today projecting if Dan Quinn is fired, I would assume Eric Bieniemy would be very high on Arthur Blank's wish list. Beyond Eric Bieniemy, I don't know. So those are my answers to those questions. Cody Stokes, do you think we have any D linemen with some upside? Depends on what you think upside. What are you calling upside? Like, do I think we have D linemen that have the potential to be like Pro Bowlers? Like, I think Grady Jarrett's already that. Outside of him, not really. I mean, Dante Fowler could make the Pro Bowl because he gets a bunch of sacks, but not because I think he's one of the, when I think of Pro Bowlers, not necessarily the people that get voted to the Pro Bowl, but I think of the guys that this is a guy that's in the top 5 or 10 players at his position. That's how I think of Pro Bowlers. So when I'm saying I don't think Dante Fowler's a Pro Bowler, it doesn't mean that I don't think he's capable of having a Pro Bowl type of season. If he gets like 14, 15 sacks, yeah, he can make the Pro Bowl. But I don't think you're ever going to say Dante Fowler is one of the 5 to 10 best edge rushers in the NFL. But could he produce at the same level that a top 5 to 10? So I think with Fowler, I think he's good. I think Tack is good. I think Davidson has the potential to be good. I think Kaminsky has the potential to be a solid rotational player. Outside of that, no, I guess to answer your question, I don't necessarily look at – I mean, I think other guys can impact your rotation. I think, Stephen Means and Jacob Tuitt and Mariner and Austin Larkin can be solid depth pieces. But, yeah, if we're talking upside in terms of guys that can make bank in free agency, like, yeah, I think there's only like 4 or 5 guys on the team. Talk to me about Kaminsky this year. What do you think his role will be? Whatever happened to the DL from UCF we drafted a couple years back? The D lineman from UCF. I'm blanking on who that is. Whoever you're talking about, Coach, if anybody knows who he's talking about, let me know in the chat. I'm blanking on the UCF D lineman. The only guy I can recall we had from UCF was Kamal Ishmael. But maybe I'm missing. On Kaminsky, my expectation is Kaminsky will come in. He will play both defensive end spots in the base defense. He'll play the Leo. He'll play the strong side defensive end. I think the plan is to probably have Alan Bailey play the strong side defensive end. And in that case, you'll see Kaminsky play the Leo. When Bailey needs a breather, Kaminsky will come and play strong side defensive end, and somebody else, probably Charles Harris or Deidrin Senat. Did he go to Central Florida? Was he at Central Florida? He went to South Florida. Okay. See, you guys, South Florida. He went to South Florida. That's what threw me off. I'm like, what? Like, no, he didn't go to Central Florida. South Florida. Deidrin Senat. USF. You guys throw me off. Dejan Sinat. Yeah, man. Look, no, I guess I forgot about Sinat, just like the Falcons did. I forgot about it. I think he has some upside to be a in that sort of Kaminsky range of like a solid rotational piece that can come off the bench and give you plus value, maybe be a low level starter for you because of his ability on rundowns. But he's not like a 3-down player in my eyes. I think Kaminsky has more upside to be a 3-down guy because at least he can bring a little bit more juice as a pass rusher on the inside. So to answer that question about Kaminsky, my expectation in the base defense will play defensive end. He'll play both sides on the defensive line at defensive end, and then occasionally he'll kick inside in the nickel sub package and rush from a D tackle position. And I think he can do some of that stuff pretty well. I've learned AJ Terrell had 100+ fever during the LSU championship game. That tells me he has a high motor. How do you think he will pan out? Yeah, I've heard the rumors about the fever too. I haven't heard those confirmed yet from other people. But he started out that game pretty well. So if it was his Jordan fever game, he started out pretty strong, and then things took a turn for the worse in the second quarter, and he never recovered from that point in time. So I think when people knock Terrell for that one game, I think it's not fair to him. I think when you look beyond that game, he played well. But, I think that game exposed some of his limitations. And when we talk about limitations, we're not talking about like him being bad or anything. We're just like, that's why he was taken 16th overall and not 6th overall. I think that's what we're talking about with that game. So there you guys have it. I think we're at about an hour on today's episode. I appreciate you guys. Do I think Griffin at his age is a better pass rusher than Fowler? Yes. Griffin can do more things than Fowler can. Fowler is one note. He's not as one note as Vic Beasley was, but he's kind of a one note guy. And if you're curious what I mean by that, go check out my all 22 review on Dante Fowler on this channel here on YouTube. So I explain sort of what I think Fowler is in that breakdown. Do you think we will win the division? No. I think we're shooting for wild card. Do you think there's any chance Terrell can instantly come in and play at a fairly high level as Marlon Humphrey and Jair Alexander both did in their rookie season? I think there's a chance. I'm not closing the door on that. I just don't know if it's fair to have those expectations. You know what I'm saying? Like those types of rookie impact guys don't come around. There's usually one or two every year. If you were asking me, does Terrell have a better chance than a lot of the other guys drafted this year? Absolutely. Would I sit here and say that he's a safe bet to do that? I'd probably say Okuda's the safest bet there, but you can certainly make an argument that Terrell, I think, is in a better position than many others to be the next option there. But I think there's a chance he can do it, but I wouldn't sit here and say that it's a lock. Like, I feel like expecting your rookies to come in and be these impact guys is you're kind of setting them up a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like you shouldn't need rookies to come in and be impact guys. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's where I stand. I saw your video on Fowler. I'm not satisfied. I started to break it to you. I mean, it was an hour long. I think I broke him down pretty thoroughly. So I apologize for that. But maybe you will be satisfied with my upcoming breakdowns of guys like Terrell and I'm already blanking on who we got. Marlon Davidson and Matt Hennessy. It's been a long day, guys. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in, sending your questions in the chat, and satisfied with Fowler, not you. Okay. Yes, I will do a draft breakdown on the draft picks. We will be breaking down some film on this channel here so that you guys can see. Do have some all 22 with some of the guys, so we will get some all 22, but a lot of it will be YouTube cut-ups. But we'll get to show you some of the positives and negatives from these guys in the coming weeks. So that's something to plan. So definitely, if you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe to Pro Football Central here on YouTube. Make sure you hit that bell so that you know whenever we do come back and do shows, whether it's during the week or on weekends, you will be there getting those notifications when we go live. Make sure that you like us on Facebook, Falcon Central Radio. I know I've been promising you for 6 months that we're going to put content up on Facebook. It's still the plan to do so. We'll just find it when we get there. Appreciate that, Kojak Nantucket. And follow us on Twitter at Falcons PFC. And follow me on Twitter at Falcons. Follow Pro Football Central at PF Central on Twitter. I think that's it. It's been a while that we've done one of these shows. I'm forgetting how to do the outros. I always forget how to do the outros, even when we do it on a weekly basis. So that's it. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. You know where to find us, guys. We will be back with more content this summer, breaking down these draft picks, doing some film reviews. So stay tuned for that. Appreciate you guys for tuning in for another week of Falcon Central Radio. We'll be back soon. Probably next week with at least a film breakdown of AJ Terrell. So make sure you follow us and you'll find out when that happens. So till then, guys, appreciate it. Have a good night. Stay safe.